Okay, so I did figure out some things with the recording. So I have that external hard drive. So I'm saving the recordings on the external hard drive for a while. And then I will, once I get a little collection, I'll probably do something with YouTube or something like that. I'm not really quite sure. There'll be raw video for, I'm not ready for video editing just quite yet. So, so that'll be available at some point soon. Does anybody have any questions from last week? We did our little trees, and this week we're going to build on the concept of value and finding the value first before we work on color and how that relates to the colors that you choose. I should turn the, well, I'll do that in a minute. The photo reference that I sent you guys is from our camping trips that we didn't do it this year, but it's the Wading Pines River, so it's brackish water. It's up near Batstow. You've probably, if you've painted with me for any number of years, you've probably painted something from my camping trips because it's just really pretty there. And I love the blue reflections in the water, the way the brackish water holds those reflections so deeply, like that. The blues are so pretty in the reflection of the brackish waters. The ripples in the front of the water were technically caused by Gabby. So other photos right before this had Gabby playing in the waters, but that's where they're coming from. But I liked the ripples. I didn't want to have us worried and distracted by Gabby in the water. That's a whole nother class, figures in the paintings. So we won't be doing figures right now.
Well, this looks like a good exercise.
Yeah, it is. Well, I have in the works, people have asked for portrait classes, and I've always been kind of hesitant to do that. So I figured out a way that I'm going to do a portrait course. It will include charcoal drawing and the portrait painting together. So that way we're not just jumping right into painting. So that'll be available soon. I just don't know where I'm going to do it yet. If I'm going to do it on Zoom or if I'm going to do it in person. I kind of feel like I should do it in person first before I attack it on Zoom, just so I can get a feel of how people are working. But anyway, I'll let you know more about that later.
Can you see this?
That's wonderful.
Oh, I didn't do it. That's the portrait we're working on tomorrow in class. So, but that's,
wow.
Yeah.
Is it with Tom Rutledge or?
No, Rose Sinatra.
Oh, okay.
I take her drawing classes, and she tries to challenge you a lot. So
yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That'll be a good one to work with. Especially sometimes it is nicer to work with something that's already drawn. So you can kind of see, instead of working from a photograph first, if you see how somebody, the movement of the drawing is
I think that's her. Yeah, I think that's her understanding. She's very loose and very free, even with portraits. So let's see what happens tomorrow.
Yeah. Good. Keep us posted.
Oh,
All right. So
Zoom? Is that on Zoom?
no, it's not. I go to her house.
Oh.
No, she doesn't do Zoom.
I tell you what, Zoom's going to be a part of my curriculum for the foreseeable future. I mean, even
that works for me.
I like both. So there's advantages to both.
There are.
Okay. So in just a second, I'm going to turn on my easel camera and we'll start going. But so go ahead and get your tracing paper. I keep trying to call it tissue paper. My brain is really not grasping that it's not tissue paper for some reason. Even when I was typing my notes, I was typing tissue paper instead of tracing paper. All right. So a little fun thing to do with tracing paper, you can not only find your values easier. Like say if your values, it's a really busy scene and you're having a hard time distinguishing what your values should be and you're working from a photograph, you can use tissue paper to simply cover it. And you can see, I'm going to go over here. Hold on. I'm just holding it in place for now because we're going to move it around a little bit. So I can see if I keep everything as is, we have, let me spotlight my easel so you can see it better. I'm going to take my black. Without worrying about fussing about detail, I'm just getting those initial shapes in there. This is a little more detailed in value. It's almost like a nice little thumbnail. We're going to do some of that next, but first, we're just going to identify the value. Now I'm looking at the trees with the water. The trees and the water are both that medium value. If you squint and you look at the two, they're about the same. The sky is the lightest value, but the brightness in the trees equals the brightness in the water. So we really have just some generic abstract shapes to get us started. If we weren't doing any sort of cropping or composition manipulation, you could simply just start your painting with that bit of information. And you can look for the variety of compositional issues. For instance, the horizon line, it's pretty close to the top third. It's a little above half, but you have some lovely diagonals to work with, leading the viewer's eyes in a little journey. You kind of zigzag through as it brings you through the scene. So take a minute, make your own little value scale, and then we're going to do some other compositional stuff with the tissue paper. See, I said tissue paper again. My goodness. With the tracing paper or your piece of paper. I will have, the chat is available if anybody wants to just chat any questions at any time. So if you want to do that, you may. That is the only bad thing about the tracing paper. When these markers, they kind of bleed and smear a little bit before they dry. Okay. How's everybody doing on their value scale? Good. Okay. So in Tuesday's class, I did this first little value scale that we just did. And I said to myself, I'm like, okay, well, I like that composition. I'm just going to keep it because I cropped the photo where I wanted it to paint it anyway, right? But I wanted to encourage everyone to do a little more testing with their composition to see what they wanted to do. And when I did that, I was happy I tested using my thumbnails because I ended up painting it the scene a little bit differently because I found a different view that I liked better. So what I want you to do next, you know, we're kind of spoiled because we can edit things on our computers and we can see, we can crop on the computer and all that kind of good stuff. But you know, what if you're back in the good old days and all you had is an actual photograph in your hand? It's also, this next thing is also kind of a fun way to challenge yourself to see things differently because you're using the paper and pencil to kind of identify things a little bit differently. You can see it differently than you can on a computer screen. It just, for me, it personally helps the creative flow just a little bit. So what I've done is on my tissue paper, I have some generic sizes. I have, you know, if I wanted to go vertically, continue horizontally, but a smaller size than the original image, and a square format. And so what I'm going to do is, if it's too distracting, actually, I'm going to cut my tissue paper so that I can, so it's not so distracting. I'll cut out the shapes so they are individual, and then you can see what I'm talking about a little bit better. So I'm going to take each shape that I have made. I've got my little square or my little rectangle, and I'm going to kind of run it around the paper and see what I like. If there's something else that pops out. And as I'm looking at it, I'm going, okay, well, now the horizon is completely in the middle of the paper. So do I want to take that chance? Maybe, maybe not. But actually, if I use this composition, I do have thirds on one side, just not the other. So there's a nice little diagonal there. And a little, some lovely angles. So that's some fun shapes that we're finding in there that once again, I wouldn't have found if I just dove right in. So even though these are trees, and I'm using just very linear motions here to get my information down, the value of the overall shadows in there makes these lovely little triangles, which makes for an interesting composition. Oh, so now with the way I have it cropped, my value scale changes just a little bit because I'm not in this overall darker body of water. I'm in this brighter reflection. Now the value matches the value in the sky. And that little bright strip of green in the middle also matches. So we have light, light, light. The trees are medium, and then the shadows are your dark. So if I hold that off to the side, that's a pretty interesting look there. So the next one I'm going to do is, once again, I'm going to play around and find the new rectangular shape. Let's see what I like. Just kind of float it around. Look for something totally different this time. Decide what I feel like tackling more. If it's the water, if the water scares you, maybe not. Or you can take it and be a larger vertical. That's kind of nice. I do like, I keep going back to, I like this nice little slant, little concave, convex curve / angle of the water and the trees. So I feel like I want a little bit of that in whatever composition I choose. All right, so this is again a little bit similar to the one that I just did, but it's more information, different location. And just like the last time, the value in my sky matches the value in the water because it's the lighter blue of the water. Got my medium. And once, yeah, so that's like the second one. So light, 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 medium up in the trees, and then dark in the water. I drew the shapes on my tracing paper, the shapes and the size first. Another way to do it is just to look at your photograph and decide the size and the shape while on, oh shit, sorry. Okay, I accidentally hit the button on my phone to tell it to dial into the audio instead of not. So I use the computer's audio. And we would have had echoes and quickly if that went through. Okay, so you can draw, you can just run the tissue paper or over and decide the shape and the size of the thumbnail you want. I'm going to do one more in a square format just because I've been working in square a little bit lately. So I'm going to do one more. So you guys can go ahead. If you haven't been doing your thumbnails, take a few minutes to do your thumbnails. And decide on the composition that you want using your thumbnails. I'm going to do this last little thumbnail here and then I'll stop the recording and you guys can continue to work. So this time I'm kind of cutting out the sky completely because I love that deep blue in the water. There's not a lot of light value. There's just a little bit in the middle here with that highlighted. Strip of I don't know exactly what they are. They grow in the water, but it's not marsh grass. What is it there? Oh, it's the edge grass. So it is like a marshy grass. So then there's that little square format. So I'm going to tape these up together. Now, you know, I did these super fast, kind of, you know, ignoring some of the directional markings. You know, when you do a thumbnail sketch, you can certainly take a little more time and incorporate the fact that these are trees. You know, you can make them look a little bit more like trees just to help your visual process. If you're only looking for value, then, you know, certainly keep it directional and abstract, however you'd like to do. All right, I'm going to stop the recording so you guys can work for a minute. All right, so now that I've readjusted my paper, and get that little value study in there.
The sky, yep. I like a little bit of the sky.
So technically in this one, I divided the blue into two different values. So I would need two different markers really, like another gray. So if you're just sticking with the 3 scale value, the blue would still be in 1. So for right now, we'll let it read. Well, I guess that works actually. Now that I'm looking at it, the lightest of the blue matches the lightest of the greens. So their value is the same. That's the lightest value. All right, so that's the composition that I like. So how did everybody else do? Do you want to share? Do you have questions? You need a few more minutes.
I don't know how to get this over with. Disassemble everything.
So, you know,
I'm gonna kind of go with the square on this side, but
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna keep the sky
okay,
because I think you can just blue it in similar
Yeah.
to the water.
absolutely.
The main things for me that I like about this photograph is the two things I really need to learn is how to do a group of trees like this to make it look nice.
Mm-hmm.
And the reflections aren't as hard for me as trying to get the trees to look nice. And the water with the ripples.
Yeah. Yeah. So today we're going to do a little trick with this particular type of water. I have a little trick that I'll show you with actually the start. I'll show you. I'm going to hold up. This was Tuesday's class.
Ah,
So
oh my God.
the water is not 100% complete, but we're going to talk about how to get all of that information in there. This was the photo reference. So it has a little more action in those ripples and a little extra color. But later on, when we get to it, we're going to use a little bit of rubbing alcohol to help us achieve those. They're kind of like, I kind of call it, it's almost like a hard edge ripple. When the color is so distinct in between, this going up is blue, going down is green, like that kind of a thing. There's little specific edges. They're beautiful to look at, but they can be a little challenging. So we're going to do a little bit of that once we get to it. This isn't quite finished, but it's getting there. I still have some work to do on the trees, but that's what we're going to start with today. So take a minute. If you haven't already decided, make your decision and go with it, and set up your paper accordingly. But I'm definitely pushing myself to do thumbnails more often. I'm finding more and more value. The more I do it, the more value I find in the process, in that exercise. And then the more, a lot of times I use the same or similar photo references to teach with, but when I'm doing the thumbnails, I'm finding more ways to use the same photograph without it having to be the same composition. So you can get more out of your photos if you just take a minute like we just did and change up the composition, change up the shape, all that kind of fun stuff is really a neat thing. So first, I'm going to go ahead and make some markings here on my paper so I know where to fold. What I decided. And so actually what's neat here now is now that I folded it, I still see little bits of sky creeping through, which is going to be nice because then I can tie in some sky holes and break up the trees, because I just have a solid grouping of trees back here now, but I can break up the trees with some sky holes and that'll add some interest as well. I'm gonna go ahead and put the value scale in here as well. Get rid of that. Ew. Tuesday, all I had with me was a Sharpie for my dark for the value. And the Sharpie dries nicely and didn't bleed through the tracing paper. So that's something to remember. Okay. So I'm still going to tape all 4 sides down. I like to do that. You will need pipe insulation. So if you don't have it out, go ahead and get out your pipe insulation as well. Today we're going to just stick with a dry underpainting. Is my paper crooked? I think my paper's crooked. All right, so keep your thumbnails handy with the one that you decided to go with, and use your thumbnail to create your initial line drawing. Don't worry about anything else. This is what we're going to use to create the initial values. So sharpen my pencil. Okay. So using my thumbnail right here, I'm going to block in a little bit of a swoop up. I'm not worried about how all the little different, because there's little bits of dark that kind of go up in there. I just want the overall value breakdown in here. So we've got a big chunk of dark. A lot of medium. With a little reflection of medium coming through. All right, so that matches the lines on my thumbnail. So Sorry, I realized I hadn't put my gloves and a bottle on, so let me do that real fast. So the first thing I'm going to do is look for, now we're relating value to color, okay? Refresher. We always go dark to light. When we start our first layer, it's usually a little bit darker than what goes on top, so we can add some life and action to what sits on top. So my dark for this one is going to be eggplant. If you don't have eggplant, you can combine black with purple or black with an ultramarine blue. My medium, I'm going to find a medium blue. I'll find a medium green. And then my light, I'll find my light blue, I'll find my light green. Okay, and just we're sticking with very simple colors to get us started. And I'm going to block it in. I don't have to go too heavy because like I said, I'm going to be using some pipe insulation to move this around soon enough. Just want to get the paper a little bit stained. I'm not worried about those little ripples just yet. We'll get there. So this medium blue, I'm going to go a little bit darker, right? Because we're going to be putting other colors on top. So there's two blues. Actually, I could even go darker than this blue. This one's kind of light, but that's okay. And then I'll go with sometimes it's funny. Sometimes turquoise has a gray property to it. I'm going with turquoise as the under part of as my light value. So if I stand back and squint, dark, it's a pretty close medium, but it's still a medium. And then that's obviously a bright. So now I need to find my greens to correlate with that. So a nice medium green. So time of year is July. So the summer greens are in full effect. That lovely summertime green is in your face. Everything's bright and bloomed. That's a little too dark for that. Well, I do need to come up a little bit. Hold on. All right, so this will be my brightest green, only because I know I need room to get the lighter stuff on top. So I'm going down a bit in value so that I can climb when I put the highlights on top. So again, my medium green, pretty close in value. When I'm looking at them right next to one another, they're pretty close, but that's okay for the underpainting, this dry underpainting, because as we build on top, the true values will start to come out as to what they should be. All right. So nice big blobs of color, very abstract shapes. Once we get our paper stained, then we can start to build our layer. So take a minute, get this down if you haven't already. I'm going to pause the recording, and while the recording's paused, I'm going to take my pipe insulation and just do a quick skim over the top. Okay, so this initial little bit here, we have everything, it's kind of blended in. Dog barking, hold on. In directional marks. So some of the grasses I have going up, some of the trees. Kaiser, come on. Of course, he doesn't want to come back in. Okay. So the water, I kept it nice and horizontal. We'll be working on those little bits of wave soon enough. So let's focus first on the trees, because that's kind of where we started with last week, with the values in the trees based on the time of day. So time of day is still morning at this point. Let me think about that. Actually, no, I think it was about lunchtime because we got back from our little kayaking trip. So it was probably between 11 and 12 in the afternoon. So, but with the way everything's going, you can see that the sun's kind of shining in through here. So let's start with the darks as we would normally. I'm just going to re-emphasize some of those shapes. I'm going to be a little bit more exacting instead of the overall blobs of value. Start to look at some of the directions that the tree branches are growing. Like this little bit here kind of pops through that line of grass. So just training my eye to look for the darkest darks, giving them their home. So I missed this little dark blob here in the underpainting, so I can just put it in now. I'm going to try to avoid any kind of blending for a little while. I want to see if I can get the pastel to do the work for me. So it's a good time to practice how hard and soft you push. I'm going to keep it kind of gentle. Once again, using the directional marks to help me along the way. So I use the eggplant to re-emphasize some of that dark information there. Now I'm gonna start to pull in some of those greens. There's lots of greens in this, obviously. Go lay down. Lots and lots of greens to choose from. So based on the type of foliage that's there, when we look, we see these nice warm greens in the grasses here, but then there's this kind of minty greens poking through here. And again, the warm, brighter greens up in there. So think about that when you're choosing your colors, what the undertone of the colors are. I'm going to use some, don't be shy to use some testing. So that's a little brighter than I wanted it to be, but it's not 100% wrong. I'll incorporate a little bit of it. I know this green isn't going to be a top green anywhere, but it's there a little bit. So Dwayne, you were mentioning struggling with a group of trees like this. So
Yes.
directional markings are a big thing. And pockets of light and dark. That's what kind of gives it the personality. If we have, right now, I have dark blob, skinnier dark blob, skinnier dark blob. I'm going to be working on finessing these in a very light touch. I don't want to overwhelm and oversaturate the tooth of the paper at all. I want to just gently build the effect by light layers. So just keep a light touch for as long as you can. My green's a little too brown. Let's see. A little too brown. It's funny, a lot of the greens that I have are quite brown, really. Some of that olive makes them a little too brown, so. That's a little too light, a little too fast. Let's see. It's going to be useful color, just not yet. So when you go too light too fast, that can be an issue too. So if it looks like it's too bright and you haven't gotten those midtones all the way in there, you need to step back and keep looking for your midtones. That's better. So the more I build in here, the more the tooth is just going to start to pick up little bits of color. And you can see the darkness through it. I like this mid color here. It's nice. Now the water is a little bit darker, so the values of the reflection in the water is just a little bit darker than what's there. And the reflections in the water are super soft. There's a lot of texture in the trees, and it's pretty soft in the water. This is a slow build day, guys, so don't look for immediate results. My ugly face is going to last for a little bit. In person, the greens in my water aren't nearly as bright as they are on camera. Just a little FYI. Too bright. There we go. So I'm looking at a couple of the trees right here in the middle. And I can see it's got this little bit of directional motion kind of hanging down and out. The two trees right next to one another. So as I gently shuffle my pastel over the area, I got a little slant to it to match. Go a little bit over some of the dark so it has a nice little reflection. Little by little, inch by inch. I know it's going to get even brighter in a couple of spots. So I'm still using the whole side of the pastel as I'm making these marks. Now in some locations I have to push a little harder. But I want, as I'm building these marks, I don't want to be too smeary with them, if you know what I mean. I don't want them to just be this smeared blob on top of one another. I want them to create the texture I'm looking for. So sometimes you have to make some adjustments to make that happen. Or maybe even scrape away a little bit if you've already filled the tube. So many greens. And also in conjunction with your eggplant, you can put things in there like a nice deep ultramarine or a shade of like a red violet, something really deep in value, but a little bit different just to give it some personality. Because as we know, when you're working with a photograph, the photograph sharpens and darkens. I'll put some blue in there. I don't know. Just gonna tap it a little bit. I'm not gonna blend it. I'm just gonna tap it to set it. I think that lightened it up too much. I'm going to though add in this dark shadow shape, you can see a variety of deep greens. So to the eggplant and the blue, I'll add some deep greens in a couple of places. That's starting to help a little bit. Right now, things are still a little mushy for me. They're not quite getting the texture just yet. Still building. So if you're not getting the texture you want just yet, don't worry about it. We're still pretty early on. Going back with a little bit of eggplant, there's a couple of pockets of shadow that are really deep. So that's starting to add some interest in that, the line of grasses in the back, just breaking up that shape a little bit. We don't like totally straight lines if we can avoid it. In landscape painting, that is. I guess you kind of have to have it if you're doing a wave because the ocean is a nice straight horizon line in the background. Okay, so this little bit of grass comes down. Little chunk of land right here. There's two different lines happening. I'm going to give my eyes a break from the greens for just a minute and work on some of the blues. Just to, greens will drive you nuts. So I'm just going to take a little break from them, get some more information in the blues to kind of marry the two together a little bit. And once I get the blues in there, then I'll hold the camera up close to the paper so you can see where I'm at. If you're not sure about your blue, definitely test it on another sheet of paper, because blues, just like greens, have all sorts of different little properties to them. I'm not worried about blending just yet, so with the water either, even though I know it's a little bit smooth, I'm not really worried about it just yet. I'm starting to go ahead and mark just some of that little bit of interaction with the greens into the blues. Just a little bit.
No matter how many colors you have, you never have enough color. Did you notice?
It's true. I'm staring at my greens going, wait a second, I need something different. And I'm not quite finding what I want. But it's okay. So then that's when we have to get out of our head and think about the value of that green. Is the value the right value? And then we have to go with, is it warm enough or cool enough? So warm and cool, ugh, I hate those words sometimes, because sometimes it still gets a little confusing when you're thinking about warm and cool. Because we have warm greens and cool greens all in the same painting, which can be a little bit tricky. This one has a little too much yellow in it, so it's just going to be part of the layering process. So because I'm using a terry, and it's a pretty decent one. I'm just kind of giving it a little shimmy on the surface for it to just kind of stick. Now I'm seeing some marks that I don't necessarily like because of the way the stick is shaped and the paper and such is just taking it differently. So I'll worry about knocking down some of those lines in a little bit. All right. For those interested, I'm about to take the camera down and get a little closer so you can see how the marks are building and how things are coming together. Looking at it. Oh, here we go again. All right, straight on. And then I'll get a little closer. It's freezing. Hold on a second. Oh, there we go. Nope. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna have to start looking at camcorders because if I get a camcorder, it'll be hooked to the computer and the computer's connection. I don't have as much to worry about because this is really blurry. Hold on. Give it a second to catch up. Yeah. Hold on. That's not giving a good read either. All right, so it's a little better from a distance. I will, you know what I'm gonna do now? I'm gonna take a shot of this with my good camera, and then I'll send you guys some progress shots and a final shot with a good image so you can see a little better as you go. Oh. I'm going to pause the recording for a little bit. I'm going to stop working for just a little bit to give you guys a chance to catch up if you haven't. So my next little bit for working on the trees. So actually, I'm going to hold up Tuesdays real fast again. All right, so here's Tuesdays again. Tuesdays.
Love Tuesdays.
I really am liking Tuesdays much better than I'm liking today's. Tell you that much.
Yeah, me too.
This is reading really, really bright on camera. It does have a little more green to it. But you can see, no, it's not finished, but I was just using that gentle kind of layering the colors on top of one another to get the illusion of trees and clumps of leaves and things like that. And it was working a little better on Tuesday than it is today. I don't know if it's just because I was using different pastels because my box is the teaching box or what. But just gentle, they all had the darkness underneath and then just little bits of gentle layering on top was giving some really nice illusions. So that's my goal. That's where I'm going for. So as I continue with my tree line, that's where I'm headed. I'm still looking for value first, meaning there's a lot of mid-green in here right next to the dark. So that's the kind of things I want to find. That's what makes it look a little bit more real is the darkness underneath, but then those clumps of color sitting on top. And the value of the color sitting on top is what makes it believable. So let me get even more, because if I'm looking at the photograph, now I'm looking and I'm seeing more dark than what I have. Like, I think I went a little too, that one of the greens that I put in there is maybe a little too light, too fast. So a little gentle layer of eggplant can mix things together a little bit and bring it to the value I want. I don't need to get rid of what I have, but I can just add to it. I don't want what I keep seeing as I stand back is stripes, you know, stripes of color, stripes of leaves. I don't want stripes. I want more natural, organic shapes. So some of the shapes I'll combine together. I'll break them up in some way so that it's not generic stripes. No soldiers in a row. So that's starting to help a little bit. There we go. I'm also trying to be aware of the reflections in the water because they need to match whatever I'm doing up top. So if I'm at a point where I'm doing a color that might be closer to what's on top, my markings are going to be a little smaller, meaning if it's the lightest that tree has to offer, my marks are a little bit shorter and they're not standing out on camera. Hold on. I could probably go a little lighter anyway. The wind sounds like it's kicking up here, that's for sure. So I'm also making sure to clean off my pastel in between so I don't just, again, make runny little markings. In this particular scene, the foliage is so thick, you don't see tree trunks and such. So tree trunks can be super helpful when you do see them. They can add a lot to the scene. Right here, we don't really see them, so it's okay. You can certainly add a couple if you feel like it. I'm currently just staring at my tray of greens. Just looking aimlessly, hoping one will pop out and say, this is the one to use.
It's a pink.
This one has a little bit of a blue in it. And then some of them are so soft, they just make weird little smears. Hmm. So I think I might just go ahead and get out my workable spray fix to help me with the next layer. I don't want to get rid of what I have. But I feel like those next colors just aren't going to sit well on top based on how it's feeling underneath my markings right now. So let me do one more thing. A little more information over here. All right, now I'm going to use, I'm going to get my spray fix. And I'm only just giving the top bit of trees a little coating. Let that dry for a second. Doesn't take long for this to dry before you can start messing with it again. So while that's drying, I'm going to look at some colors. Do a little testing of my thousands of greens here. Well, now see, this green looked so bright, and now on my little tester, it might be what I'm looking for. That's good. Maybe.
These colors work, look like they're supposed to. Just a minute, you wait.
You start making all these marks with your greens, and then you start to get lost in which mark was which.
And which
Okay,
green?
here we go. So now, just tapping on top, and I'm starting to get some nice effects that I was looking for. Little scumble on top. And it's living the way I want it to live. So you can start to kind of nicely see the texture that the spray fix left behind. And I can push a little harder in a couple of locations where I want the leaves to clump together a little bit more. So this scene too, another, thing to consider is how far away you are from the actual object that you're painting. And when I took this photograph, my feet, you're only maybe 20, 30 yards away from the other side. And that's, it makes a difference. Now you see a little more detail in the leaves and you see a little more detail in the water. And that can, overcomplicate things in your brain as well as on the painting, because now you've got all this other information to input. They're not just clumps of trees and leaves in the distance. They're a little closer and you can see more information, and you want to put more information because you see it all. So it becomes a little more complicated to simplify, which is what I'm certainly running into myself here.
What?
It's a little too light. It's starting to come a little bits of layers. So here I go again, once again. As I take away the stripes, I put the stripes back in, and I take them away and I put them back. And I take them away and I put them back. So if that's happening to you, you're not alone. When I look at the image on the screen, it's a little more obvious. When I'm working on it up close, it's not so obvious, but I keep focusing on looking at the photo reference to see, okay, where's the lights, where's the medium, where's the dark? And then I put all the dark in, and then I correct the little stripies, and now I put the light back in, and there's the stripes again. So I've got, pockets, little fingers. So I want to continue to fuss with that. Actually, I don't really want to continue to fuss with that. I want it to be correct. So let's start to break things up again. Clumps of trees start to, come into the concept of, like, when we play with clouds, You could be fussing and mussing with clouds forever. Lines of trees are no different. Adding a little bit more information into the water again. So there's a little bit of, I added a lot more there, but there's a little bit of light you can see in the water. The sunlight's kind of reflecting. I'm kind of punching it up a little bit because that's where, when you see the sunlight on the water, when it's brackish water, it looks like that goldeny brown, like a cup of tea kind of a thing. I'm going to give my trees a rest for a minute because otherwise I'm just going to rip the paper off the board. It's kind of how I'm feeling about that right now. I am going to go ahead and get just a little cup of rubbing alcohol, and let me find the proper paintbrush to tell you. All right, so here's the shape I'm kind of looking for you. I don't know what they're called. What are they called? They're round. They're considered round. So they're like watercolor brushes. I think doesn't really matter. The shape matters. They are soft. That matters. So normally when we do our underpaintings, they're like the hard scrubby kind just to get it into the paper. These are soft and round. So that helps. So I'm going to get a little cup of rubbing alcohol. You don't need a lot. Find a clean cup. And as always, water works and all that kind of stuff. You just need to, gauge your time. So when you're doing this, this is more about kind of in the middle of things. This isn't a final step. It is a step along the way to help you. And you can do this anytime in your pastel painting if you want to experiment and try it. I like it for this type of water. I don't want drippies. I just want to take it and then start to do those directional marks. Not all over. Let's kind of take a look at what's happening with the ripples. Now they'll dry. They look really neat when they're wet, and then they dry and they have a little bit of extra color, a little bit around, like you can see like the bleeding up and stuff. So that's why it's not a final step. But then once it dries, you can add little bits of reflective color into it, and you get a lovely soft effect. You can make this as specific or as loose as you want. And then there's the little ripples that are over here that aren't so specific, but you can just kind of dab them in there. And it'll help you with your form. So I'm just using the side of the brush to just kind of dab some of the rubbing alcohol while I'm looking back and forth to the photo reference to look for the patterns in the water, because that's pretty darn important, is how the patterns, how the water's moving, how those reflections go. It's really important. Got a little runner. But for this, you don't want to just paint over everything. You're not scrubbing the color into the paper. You're just finding the movement.
She's alcoholing it and dragging it in.
So you can see part of this is already drying. And, you know, the rubbing alcohol kind of dulls some things out a little bit, which is why it's not a top layer event. But it is a really big help for this type of water, I think. Okay, so now that I have those shapes in there, I got to let it dry. You can even use it a little bit, you know, up top here. It's a little tighter. You want to use it to help get some of those other little ripples in there, you can. Again, it's going to dry and it's going to be a little bit dull. You can get a little carried away with it too. But let's say I did want to like use it up in the trees, you could help you move some stuff around. Get some of those specific shapes you were looking for. Now I'm just kind of playing, you know, I'm getting a little carried away, but that's all right. And then you might decide you like the look when it's all done and leave it be, which you can certainly do. Okay. So once it's dry, as usual, even like when we do an alcohol wash underpainting, you have to wait for it to dry. Once it's dry, that's when you can use all your colors to start to play. So I'm going to look at, I'm going to go a little darker. It's a little too bright there. And again, once again, you start with your dark. Let's give a little swoosh. You bring back in your greens. There's a little bit of a turquoise. This is too. I could go lighter there. Well, that's too light. There we go. So I just use that little bit of a road map that I made with the rubbing alcohol.
You gotta use thick and thin. Got some thick, if you look at the picture, there's thick.
I know that, I just have trouble doing it.
Yeah, okay, well, you use it very fine edging and really, really light. And the broken lines.
Now you can also go back and forth with this. And you don't have to just have one layer of it. If you like it and then you messed up, you can go back in. It's not the end. There's a little bit of like purple in there. Let's see. This is a bit much, so I'm gonna tone it down, but I went a little too bright. Just layer back in some blue on top. All right, so that's starting to, you can start to really see some of those patterns in the water, right? We can fuss and we can muss with that forever as well. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna go back up in the trees for a minute. I'm kind of at an even, I'm like at an even Steven kind of a thing here. So I'm going to go back up into the trees a little bit. I'm gonna work on the grasses a little bit up there. I'm gonna try not to grab any new greens because I feel like I have so many greens out. I don't want things to get too overwhelming. Now I have, okay, so now I'm thinking about my value scale in the beginning, right? The whole thing that kind of led us here. So this little section of the top of the water, and then the grasses all the way up to this last tree, that was my lightest, my brightest, and my lightest. So I want to kind of get that back in there. Get that value back up in there. This is a little yellow, more yellow than I want it to be. So I have to add some greens to it. The trick is to add the proper green and not take away the brightness. Oops, dragging color. Tapping in a couple of these green grasses that are up front because I can see them because we're close up. So we can see some of those, get those in there. Sharpen up some of those reflections. As I'm coming through too, I'm thinking about texture, right? There's a lot of, there's a bunch of different types of texture in here. So I just want to make sure I have the texture in the right locations and not too much in the wrong spot.
This as much as I can.
So everything that I put the rubbing alcohol on in the tree line is all gray, which was fine. It's starting to get there. This is one of those, this is going to be one of those paintings that it takes a long time to get to that point where you're like, oh, I'm out of the ugly things. This is definitely a little intense today. Let's give it a little bit of a downstroke to those sides.
It's good to hear you say that it's one of those paintings.
Yeah, I definitely
feel so bad.
Yeah, please don't. I'm definitely struggling a little bit today, but that's all right. Sometimes, that happens too. I've painted, not this exact scene, but paintings from camping a lot. And so I think I get ahead of myself because I know how it's going to go. And then I have to back it up and all that kind of good stuff. Another thing that I've been kind of changing up in how I work is using a little bit of hard pastel to kind of work on some things, work on some areas. Use it for a little bit of blending purposes, use it for a little bit of finesse. That's the wrong blue. So like in the water, if I want to just do a little bit of blending, but not really make any markings, I can do so. Whether it's with the green, with the nice dark green. Sometimes I'm finding that it's a little easier to control than trying to get those light marks with a soft stick. It works, they work well with what's there. So I've always done it with portraits. I've always used a little bit of hard pastel to help me blend, but I very rarely incorporated them in with soft pastel, with landscape. So I am finding them a little more useful than before. It's coming. It's getting there. So what's really kind of tricky to see as I keep staring at my reference here is the grass line on the water. Technically, the more I'm looking at it, the more I'm realizing what I'm looking at. The little blob of grass is technically divided in half, where half is real and half is a reflection. So I'm just now noticing that. I remembered that from the day, now that I think about it. But you can see it a little clearly on a couple of the blobs. You can see like a little dark line in the middle of it. So that's something I should address. So I think what I'm going to do is just make the grass a little taller and just kind of come down this way. Instead of trying to cut it in half. That doesn't look like it's right. Now, as I'm still fidgeting with the the value in the trees, I am probably going to be adding yet another layer of spray fix. I'm not scraping away though. I mean, you know, scraping away is always an option. Spray fix is certainly an option. I've had you guys do both. Usually if we're in a classroom setting, we scrape away because we can't really use spray fix inside. Since having done so many ocean scenes, I have embraced spray fix a little more than I have in the past because of what I learned with how much texture it can help me with the spray of the ocean crashing down. I'm not as anti-spray fix, although I'm still, you know, as a final, I do have a brand that I use now, but you just have to make sure you have the right brand if you're going to use it as a final fixative.
What is the name of the final fixative again?
Last Cow. Hold on, I'll show it to you. There you go. LASCAUX. This one doesn't really change the colors. It's kind of expensive. I mean, this can isn't too terribly big, and it's anywhere between $25 and $35 a can, depending on where you can find it. Sometimes
It lasts for years though, right?
no, it doesn't.
Not you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, some of my big ones, I'm like, uh-oh. That was fast. Kind of jumping around just a little bit. This is that point in the painting where you have to avert your eyes from time to time and just go to different places in the painting. Because when you do that, sometimes things correct themselves. So remember that. Problems you may have had.
Underwater.
Do what? Are you talking to me or each other?
I was just saying, I'm not so sure I like my water.
Okay.
It's actually not that bad. It's the ripples that catch it.
It's the whole thing that got me. I'll send her a picture.
Yeah, so that's not too terrible. I think, let me see. I'm gonna grab my my favorite paintbrush. So my stiff bristle paintbrush, the one that's kind of loose and not too tight, and I'm gonna help with some of the texture in the grass. Try and get some of those, loosen it up a little bit and give a little drag to it.
Renee, I just sent you a photo of what I got so far.
Okay. I'll check it in just a sec. We are winding down. We have 15 minutes left. So if you do want me to look at it before class is over, send it now. And I will look at it before we get offline here. Or you can, again, you guys always, you have me all week long, so you can send it to me during the week as well. So for me, there's a lot of things left to do for me. I'm gonna stop here for now so I'll look at the email. Like I said, I think I'll do another little layer of spray fix up top. I need to work on this little section right here. You can tell in the, well, you may, I don't know if you can or not, but the water goes, there's this little island here and the water goes back behind it. So I need to try to have that show represent a little bit better there. Lots of texture to add. I'm really kind of behind today. I feel like I normally finish a little faster. I'll leave that up there. I'm going to check my email. Oops, sorry. There you are. All right. Dwayne, is looking good. It's looking good. You're right. The water does look nice. I like how that's going.
Oh, you like the water?
So far, yeah. You're not done with the water, but I like it so far. You also are having the same thing that I have going on right now, which is the stripey in the trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I see what you're doing with your tree that's like, the kind of bluish green tree.
I just wanted some variety.
I would add, if you like that variety, add that color to a couple of the other trees, because right now they just look like somebody planted very specific trees along the water edge. Like they all are like different
Right.
species. So maybe add that color to a couple of different trees and make them kind of work and overlap each other. So that's what I'm working on with mine, is that breaking up
Right.
of the shadow shapes.
Right. Well, I was just finding that, as you were saying before, you pick up the green and you start to use it, it kind of smears rather than just.
Yeah.
So maybe that's
Yeah.
why you have to spray.
Yep. That's why I put down the spray fix, so I could stop it from smearing, but I wanted those colors underneath. So,
Right.
using for me right now, I'm just kind of poking at a couple of spots.
Well, that's an idea too. I haven't done that.
Yeah. So I'm going to poke at it a little bit, and then I'm going to spray fix again, and then I'll start to add some more on top. So this would be, right now, if I look at mine from a distance, it would be pretty good if it was a distant tree line, but mine's not it's not a distant tree line. So I do want some more information. I kind of like how that looks pretty good. But I am going to go ahead and spray it again and do another layer. So yeah, don't forget your trusty paintbrush. All of our tools, I think, came into play today. We had rubbing alcohol, we had pipe insulation, we have spray fix, we have the paintbrush.
Renee, I sent you an email,
Okay,
so you should get it shortly.
okay. I'm gonna stop the recording. I'm not gonna do any more work on this. This is where mine's gonna end for today, but I'm gonna stop the recording.